Krelvax stood in the briefing room of the Centauri military complex, his 4 eyes scanning the assignment document with growing irritation. After 3 decades of service analyzing battle tactics across 12 different war zones, he was being sent to babysit humanity's first combat deployment. The newest species to join the Galactic Coalition, humans were primitives who had only discovered faster-than-light travel 15 standard cycles ago. Their technology was laughable, their physical capabilities unremarkable, and their military experience limited to fighting each other on their single planet. The Vrexian swarm had been consuming Outer Rim worlds for 2 years now, and the Coalition was desperate enough to accept any help, even from species barely capable of leaving their own solar system. Krelvax had reviewed the human biological data. No armored skin, no natural weapons, no enhanced strength or speed. Average lifespan, average intelligence. They were soft-bodied creatures who would likely panic at the first sign of real combat. He expected to write a brief report recommending they be assigned to cargo transport or medical support, then return to analyzing real military forces. The transport shuttle brought him to the human vessel, waiting at the staging area. The ship was called the Defiant, which Krelvax found amusingly optimistic. It was smaller than most Coalition cruisers, with a design that seemed functional but unremarkable. As he boarded, he noticed the crew moved with casual efficiency, none of the rigid formality he expected from a military vessel. 2 humans were actually laughing near a weapons console. Captain Jake Morrison met him at the airlock. The human was tall by their species standards, with dark hair beginning to show gray at the temples. His eyes were a pale blue color that seemed to calculate everything they observed. He shook Krelvax's manipulator appendage firmly, a human greeting gesture that the analyst had studied. "Welcome aboard," Morrison said. "I understand you'll be observing our performance. Feel free to access any area of the ship and ask any questions. We've got nothing to hide." Krelvax followed Morrison to the bridge, where the command crew worked at their stations. Lieutenant Amy Carson, the weapons officer, gave him a cheerful wave. She was a young female, with red hair tied back in a simple style. Sergeant Ben Hayes sat at a side station, methodically cleaning a projectile weapon while reviewing tactical displays. Commander Lisa Park, the first officer, barely looked up from her datapad as she coordinated with other Coalition vessels. "We're heading to the Tertius system," Morrison explained, pulling up a holographic display. "Vrexians have established a forward base there. Intelligence estimates enemy forces at roughly 2,000 ships and 50,000 ground troops." He zoomed in on the planet. "Coalition is sending everything we've got. 38 capital ships, 140 support vessels, and ground forces from 6 different species." Krelvax studied the projections. "The casualty estimates are concerning. 70% losses are expected in the initial assault." Morrison nodded calmly. "Yeah, we saw those numbers. And yet your crew seems unconcerned?" Amy Carson spoke up from her station. "We volunteered for this, sir. Every human ship in the fleet did. We knew the odds coming in." Krelvax found this puzzling, but said nothing. Perhaps humans simply didn't understand the mathematics of warfare yet. They would learn quickly enough when the shooting started. The Coalition fleet entered hyperspace, and Krelvax retreated to his assigned quarters to review more data on human capabilities. Everything he read reinforced his initial assessment. They were unremarkable in every measurable way. 3 days later, the fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Tertius system. Krelvax stood on the Defiance bridge as the sensor arrays came alive with contacts. The Vrexian forces were even larger than intelligence had predicted. Swarm ships filled the screens. Thousands of fast-moving attack craft supported by dozens of larger vessels. The Vrexians were an insectoid species that fought with overwhelming numbers and complete disregard for individual survival. They were efficient killers, biological machines bred for war. The coalition fleet moved into formation, capital ships in the center with smaller vessels forming protective screens. The Vrexians immediately rushed forward in a massive wave, their ships moving in coordinated swarms that defied standard tactical doctrine. The first coalition vessel, a Cathalian dreadnought, disappeared in a ball of plasma as 50 Vrexian ships rammed it simultaneously while firing. 2 more ships followed within minutes, overwhelmed by suicide attacks that no rational species would employ. Krelvax watched his displays with professional detachment, already calculating revised casualty estimates. The coalition was going to lose this battle badly. He began making notes for his report when Captain Morrison's voice cut through the bridge chatter. "Helm! Plot intercept course into the center of their formation. Full speed." Krelvax's translator must have malfunctioned. "Captain, did you order the ship into the enemy formation?" "Yes." "That is tactically unsound. You will be surrounded and destroyed." Morrison turned to look at him, those calculating blue eyes showing something that might have been amusement. "That's the idea." The Defiant broke from the coalition formation and accelerated directly into the Vrexian swarm. Energy weapons fire from dozens of enemy ships began hammering the shields. Krelvax gripped his console as the ship shook from impacts. This was insane. They were going to die, and for what purpose? But then he noticed something. The Vrexian ships were breaking from their attack on other coalition vessels, turning to focus on the Defiant. The human ship had drawn the attention of a significant portion of the enemy force simply by charging directly at them. It was the kind of aggressive, irrational behavior the Vrexians themselves employed. "Shields at 40%, Lisa Park reported calmly. "Forward, weapons ready," Amy Carson added, her fingers dancing across her controls. The Defiant plunged deeper into the enemy formation, enemy ships swarming around them like angry insects. Krelvax saw on the tactical display that they were approaching a larger vessel, a Vrexian command carrier that was coordinating the swarm's movements. Surely Morrison didn't intend to. "All power to forward weapons. Fire everything." The Defiant's entire arsenal unleashed at point-blank range. Plasma cannons, missile tubes, rail guns, and weapons Krelvax didn't recognize, all fired simultaneously. The command carrier's shields collapsed under the barrage, and the follow-up volley tore through its hull. Secondary explosions rippled across the enemy vessel as it broke apart. The effect on the Vrexian swarm was immediate. Without the carrier's coordination signals, the individual ships began operating independently, their attack patterns becoming less efficient. The coalition fleet pressed the advantage, destroying confused enemy vessels. But the Defiant was dying. Shields failed completely. Hull breaches appeared on 6 decks. Life support began failing as power systems were damaged. Krelvax waited for Morrison to order evacuation, the standard procedure when a vessel was crippled. "All hands, pressure suits," Morrison ordered instead. "Continue fighting. We're not done yet." Krelvax watched in disbelief as the human crew donned emergency suits and returned to their damaged stations. Amy Carson coordinated weapons from a console that was exposed to vacuum, her suit already showing a slow pressure leak. She didn't stop firing until the last Vrexian ship began retreating from the system. When the battle finally ended and rescue ships arrived, Krelvax stood in the ruined bridge, trying to process what he had witnessed. The coalition had won, though at terrible cost. 15 ships destroyed, 8 more crippled. But the Vrexians had lost more and retreated. Captain Morrison, his suit scorched and damaged, approached Krelvax. "So, How did we do? Krelvax looked at the human, really looked at him, and felt the first stirring of something he would later recognize as fear. You calculated how much damage you could inflict before dying? Morrison nodded. That's the job. Other species calculate acceptable losses to achieve victory. Yeah, Morrison said quietly. We used to think that way, too. Turns out we're better at the other approach. Krelvax said nothing. He was beginning to understand that his assignment was not about evaluating human capabilities. It was about determining if humans were safe to have as allies, and he was no longer certain of the answer. The fleet remained in orbit around Tertius III for 2 days, making repairs and preparing for the next phase. The Rexians had been driven from space, but they had entrenched themselves on the planet's surface. Intelligence scans showed thousands of warriors dug into defensive positions across the northern continent. They had to be eliminated to prevent the swarm from using the system as a forward base again. Krelvax transferred to a coalition assault carrier to observe the ground operations. His report was due in 30 days, and he needed to see how humans performed in different combat scenarios. If they had simply gotten lucky in the space battle, it would become apparent on the ground where there was nowhere to hide from sustained combat. The assault force gathered in the carrier's deployment bay. Krelvax observed the various species preparing for battle. The Centauri troops, his own kind, checked their energy weapons and tactical armor with methodical precision. The Cthalians, massive beings with thick hides, reviewed defensive positions they would establish. The Vorqual, who could see in 12 different spectrums, calibrated their sensor equipment. Then there were the humans. Lieutenant Danny Griffin's Marine unit occupied one section of the bay, and Krelvax approached to observe. The Marines were checking equipment that seemed almost primitive compared to other species' technology. Projectile weapons that used chemical propellants, explosive devices with simple timers, blade weapons for close combat. Danny Griffin was a stocky male with a scarred face and close-cropped brown hair. He noticed Krelvax watching and walked over. "You're the analyst, right?" Krelvax. "Correct. I am observing human combat performance." "Well, you picked a good one to watch." "This is going to get messy." Danny didn't seem concerned by this prospect. If anything, he seemed eager. "The Vrexians are biologically superior in close combat," Krelvax pointed out. "They are faster and stronger than humans, with natural blade appendages and acidic secretions." "Yeah, we read the briefings." Danny checked his rifle's ammunition. "Still got to go kill them, though." The landing craft launched 30 minutes later, streaking through the atmosphere toward the landing zones. Krelvax sat in a craft with Danny's unit watching the Marines. They were quiet during the descent, some checking weapons repeatedly, others sitting with eyes closed. One female, Private Kate Sullivan, was humming a tune quietly. The craft touched down in a clearing surrounded by rocky outcroppings. The moment the ramp dropped, energy weapons fire erupted from the ridgeline. A Centauri soldier next to Krelvax was hit and went down immediately. The coalition forces scattered to cover, returning fire at the enemy positions. Krelvax pressed against a boulder, observing the tactical situation. The Vrexians had excellent firing positions on the high ground. Standard doctrine called for suppressing fire, while flanking units maneuvered to better positions. He watched the Centauri forces doing exactly that, maintaining maximum range while using superior firepower. The human Marines did something different. Danny Griffin gave a hand signal, and half his unit simply charged directly up the slope toward the enemy positions. Krelvax felt his respiratory systems constrict in shock. This was suicide. Humans were too fragile to survive a direct assault against entrenched Vrexians. But then he watched what happened when the Marines reached the Vrexian positions. Private Kate Sullivan rolled a grenade into a fighting hole and dove aside as it detonated, then immediately pushed forward to the next position. Sergeant Alex Turner got hit by Vrexian acid, his armor smoking, but he kept moving forward until he could shoot the enemy warrior point blank. Another Marine used a dead Vrexian as a shield while advancing on the next position. It was brutal, violent, and absolutely ruthless. The humans fought like they expected to die, but were determined to kill as many enemies as possible first. Within 10 minutes, the ridgeline was secured. Krelvax checked the casualty reports. The human unit had taken 40% losses in the assault. By any rational standard, this was an unacceptable casualty rate. Danny Griffin was organizing his surviving Marines for the next advance, not even waiting for medical attention for a wound on his arm. Krelvax approached him. "Lieutenant, you lost nearly half your unit taking that position." "Yeah." Danny tied a bandage around his arm with one hand. "But we took it." Other units employ tactics with lower casualty rates. Other units take longer, and every minute we wait, the bugs dig in deeper. Danny looked at Krelvax with eyes that had seen too much combat. "We don't have time to be careful." The advance continued throughout the day. Krelvax followed the human Marines as they pushed deeper into enemy territory. Every position they encountered was taken with the same aggressive tactics. The humans used overwhelming firepower at close range, accepting casualties that would make other species retreat. Private Kate Sullivan lost her left arm to a Vrexian blade during one assault. A medic rushed forward to treat her while enemy fire was still incoming. As the medic worked, Kate saw a Vrexian warrior charging their position. She grabbed a grenade with her remaining hand, activated it, and somehow managed to shove it into the creature's mouth before her squad mates pulled her to safety. The explosion killed the Vrexian and two others behind it. As the medic injected her with pain suppressors, Kate was actually laughing. "Got 3 for 1, she said. "That's a good trade." Krelvax was horrified and fascinated in equal measure. How could someone laugh after losing a limb in combat? What kind of species found humor in their own mutilation if it killed more enemies? The worst incident came on the second day. Sergeant Alex Turner's squad was ambushed by Vrexian warriors in a narrow canyon. Alex found himself surrounded by 5 of the creatures, separated from his unit. He was wounded, his weapon empty. Krelvax watched from a safe position, certain he was about to witness a human death. Alex didn't call for help. He didn't try to surrender. Instead, he calmly reached for his ammunition pack, triggered the entire thing, and held it as the Vrexians closed in. The explosion killed Alex and all 5 Vrexians, preventing them from flanking the rest of the squad. That night, in the temporary camp, Krelvax found Danny Griffin staring at a small display showing images of his fallen Marines. "Why do your soldiers fight this way?" Krelvax asked. "Sergeant Turner could have called for assistance." Danny looked up, his expression hard. "If he'd done that, the bugs would have gotten behind us. He made the call that saved the most lives." "But he died." "Yeah, he died." Danny turned off the display. "You want to know why we fight like this? Because we're good at it. We've been killing each other for thousands of years back on Earth. We fought wars you can't even imagine, used weapons that made the Vrexians look like children with toys. These bugs are just another enemy, and we know how to deal with enemies." Krelvax returned to his shelter, but he couldn't rest. He accessed the human data files again, this time looking deeper into their history. What he found disturbed him more than anything he'd witnessed on the battlefield. Humans had been at war for their entire recorded history. Thousands of conflicts, millions of battles, billions dead. They had invented chemical weapons designed to cause agonizing death, biological weapons to spread disease, nuclear weapons that could exterminate all life on their planet. And they had actually used all of these weapons on each other. They had concepts in their cultures about glorious death in battle, about sacrificing yourself for your comrades, about fighting to the last breath. Every major human religion had ideas about martyrdom. Their entertainment was filled with stories of warriors and soldiers. Their children played games where they pretended to shoot each other. Krelvax found records of something humans called the Cold War, where two factions built enough nuclear weapons to destroy their civilization dozens of times over and aimed them at each other for decades. They called it mutually assured destruction and treated it as a viable strategy. They had stood on the brink of self-annihilation and only stepped back because they found something else to do: expand to the stars. As Krelvax read deeper into human history, he felt growing horror. Humans weren't brave. They weren't heroic. They were broken in a fundamental way. Their entire species had evolved to be persistent predators, chasing prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. Then they had turned that same relentless aggression on each other for thousands of years, getting better and better at killing. The galaxy had many warrior species. The Cathalians were strong. The Vorqual were deadly hunters. But no other species had spent so much of their existence fighting their own kind. Humans had refined warfare into an art form, and they had brought that expertise to the stars. Krelvax looked at the casualty reports from the day's fighting. The human Marines had taken 70% casualties, but had advanced 3 times farther than any other unit. They hadn't retreated once. They hadn't requested relief. They just kept fighting until either they won or they all died. And suddenly, Krelvax understood why the elder species in the Galactic Council had opposed admitting humans. It wasn't because humans were weak. It was because they were too dangerous. They had turned self-destruction into a military strategy. They viewed dying as an acceptable outcome as long as they killed more enemies in the process. The galaxy didn't dread humans because they were strong. The galaxy dreaded humans because they had looked into the abyss of extinction and decided that if they were going to die anyway, they would take everyone else with them. The ground battle continued for 3 more days. Krelvax observed as the coalition forces slowly pushed the Vrexians back toward their central hive complex. Every species in the assault force had taken casualties, but the human Marines had lost more than anyone. Their units were at less than half strength, and still they kept advancing. Other species rotated their troops out for rest periods. Soldiers were given time to recover from the psychological stress of combat, to eat proper meals, to sleep in relative safety. Krelvax watched as Centauri units pulled back to secure areas for 12-hour rest cycles. The Cathalians established rotation schedules to keep their warriors fresh. The humans didn't stop. They slept in muddy foxholes during brief pauses in the fighting. They ate rations while checking their weapons between assaults. When Krelvax asked Danny Griffin why they didn't request relief rotations, Danny looked at him like he'd asked why they breathed oxygen. "Because the job's not done yet," Danny said simply. Krelvax spent those days studying the human forces more closely. He noticed patterns in how they fought. They adapted quickly to enemy tactics, sometimes changing their approach in the middle of a firefight. They improvised constantly, using equipment in ways it wasn't designed for. A rifle became a club when ammunition ran out. Explosives meant for vehicles were used to collapse tunnel systems. Everything was a weapon, if you were creative enough. But what struck him most was how they communicated during combat. Other species maintained strict command hierarchies, waiting for orders before acting. Human Marines seemed to operate on instinct, knowing what their squad mates would do without being told. They covered each other's movements automatically, shared ammunition without asking, and made split-second decisions that affected the entire unit. Danny explained it during a brief rest period. We train together, fight together. You learn to trust the person next to you with your life. You know how they think, how they'll react. It's the only way to survive. But your survival rate is lower than any other species in this battle, Krelvax pointed out. Yeah, but our mission completion rate is higher. Danny cleaned his rifle methodically. That's the trade-off. We're not here to survive. We're here to win. By the 5th day, coalition forces had surrounded the central Rexian hive. It was built into a mountain, a massive complex of tunnels and chambers carved from solid rock. Intelligence scans showed it was defended by at least 5,000 Rexian warriors, with the Queen deep in the protected interior. Taking it would require a direct assault through narrow tunnels where the defenders had every advantage. The coalition commanders held a meeting to plan the assault. Krelvax attended as an observer, watching as officers from various species reviewed the tactical data. The consensus was clear. A direct assault would result in near-total casualties for any attacking force. The tunnels were too narrow for heavy weapons, the defenders too numerous. Every simulation showed the same result. The attackers would be wiped out before reaching the interior chambers. The Centauri commander suggested a siege. Seal the entrances and wait for the Rexians to exhaust their supplies. The Cathalian leader proposed using drilling equipment to breach from unexpected angles. Everyone agreed that a direct frontal assault would be suicide. Then, Captain Jake Morrison spoke up. Krelvax was surprised to see the human captain had recovered from his injuries and was coordinating with the ground forces. "My Marines will take the tunnels," Morrison said. The room fell silent. The Centauri commander's translator struggled with the statement, as if it couldn't process something so tactically nonsensical. "Captain, the casualty projections—" "We've seen them," Morrison interrupted. "We'll take the tunnels." "It is not possible to succeed," the Cathalian leader rumbled. "The defenders will kill any force before it reaches the Queen Chamber." "Maybe," Morrison agreed. "But we'll get far enough for you to finish the job." Krelvax watched the other commanders exchange glances. They knew what Morrison was saying. The human Marines would attack knowing they would die, but they would push far enough into the complex to mark targets for orbital bombardment or provide intelligence for a follow-up assault. It was a suicide mission with the objective of dying in a useful location. The Centauri commander finally spoke. "This is not how civilized species conduct warfare." Morrison's expression didn't change. "Good thing we're not civilized, then." The assault began at dawn the next day. Krelvax positioned himself with the command team at a safe distance, monitoring feeds from the Marines' helmet cameras. He watched as 300 human Marines advanced on the hive entrance. Danny Griffin led the first wave, while Morrison coordinated from orbit. The moment the Marines entered the tunnels, the Vrexians attacked. The narrow passages became a nightmare of close combat. Energy weapons were useless at such close range. The ricochet risk was too high. The Marines used their projectile weapons and blade weapons, fighting hand-to-hand with Vrexians in the darkness. Krelvax watched the camera feeds and the casualty counter. First wave, 40 Marines, 80% casualties within 15 minutes. They secured the entrance tunnels and began pushing deeper. Second wave, 60 Marines, 90% casualties in 20 minutes. They reached a major junction point and held it long enough to map the tunnel system. Third wave, 80 Marines, 95% casualties in 30 minutes. They penetrated to the inner chamber level. The efficiency was horrifying. The Marines advanced in organized waves, each group knowing they would die but pushing forward until they physically couldn't continue. Then the next wave would advance over their bodies. There was no panic, no retreat, just methodical advancement toward the objective, regardless of cost. Private Sam Rodriguez was part of the third wave. Krelvax had met him briefly, a young male who talked about his family back on Earth. Sam's camera feed showed him dragging himself through a tunnel, bleeding from multiple wounds. He'd lost his weapon. His armor was breached in several places. But he kept moving forward, crawling when he could no longer walk. Sam reached a large chamber, and his suit's sensors immediately identified it as the Hive's power generation center. He triggered his communication system, his voice weak but clear. "Command. This is Rodriguez. I found the power core. Transmitting coordinates now." Morrison's voice came back immediately. "Confirmed, Rodriguez. Good work. Extraction team is—" "Negative," Sam interrupted. "I can hear them coming. Lots of them. You need to fire now, while the coordinates are clean." There was a pause. Krelvax knew Morrison was checking the tactical situation. If they waited for extraction, the Vrexians would overrun Sam's position and possibly destroy the transmitter. The moment would be lost. "Rodriguez, confirm you understand. We fire now. You're at ground zero." "I understand, sir." Sam's breathing was labored. "Danger close. Fire when ready." Krelvax saw movement in Sam's camera feed. Vrexian warriors were pouring into the chamber. Sam drew a small blade weapon and tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't support him anymore. The camera showed the Vrexians getting closer. "It's been an honor, sir," Sam said. "Tell my parents I—" The feed cut to static as Morrison ordered the orbital bombardment. Krelvax watched on the main tactical display as weapons from 3 ships fired simultaneously at Sam's coordinates. The mountain shook as massive kinetic projectiles and plasma charges struck the Hive. Secondary explosions rippled through the tunnel system as power conduits overloaded and ammunition stores cooked off. When the bombardment stopped, seismic sensors showed the Hive structure had collapsed. The Vrexian queen and all warriors inside were dead. The objective was achieved. Total human casualties: 287 out of 300 Marines, 96%. And they had won. Krelvax stood in the command center, staring at the casualty list. Names scrolled past. Kate Sullivan, who had lost an arm and kept fighting. Alex Turner, who had sacrificed himself to save his squad. Sam Rodriguez, who had called orbital bombardment on his own position. Danny Griffin, who had died in the second wave after leading his Marines through the entrance tunnels. Captain Morrison stood nearby, watching the same list. His face showed no emotion, but his hands gripped the railing in front of him tightly enough that his knuckles were white. "How do you do this?" Krelvax asked quietly. "How do you send your people to die?" Morrison was silent for a long moment. "Because someone has to. The Vrexians won't stop. They'll keep consuming worlds, killing billions, so we do what needs to be done." He finally looked at Krelvax. "You asked earlier how we fight this way. The answer is simple. We're good at it, because we've been doing it forever. We've turned warfare into something we understand better than any other species. And yeah, it's made us into something broken. But right now, broken is what the galaxy needs." Krelvax returned to his quarters to write his report. He had 30 pages of tactical observations, casualty statistics, and strategic analysis, but none of it captured what he had truly witnessed. He started over, writing from the beginning. Subject: Human Military Assessment. Threat Level Critical. The Galactic Council must understand what humanity represents. Humans are not strong, not fast, not naturally armored. Their technology is average. Their lifespans are short. By every conventional measure, they should be insignificant. But humans have spent their entire existence fighting. They evolved as persistence hunters who chase prey to exhaustion. They developed warfare into an art form through thousands of years of killing each other. They invented weapons designed specifically to cause maximum death. They built enough weapons to exterminate themselves multiple times and held those weapons ready for generations. They have something no other species possesses: a complete acceptance of death as a tactical option. Humans don't fight to survive. They fight to ensure the enemy loses, even if it costs them everything. They will sacrifice themselves without hesitation if it advances the objective. They view individual survival as secondary to mission completion. During the Tertius campaign, human forces took 96% casualties in the final assault. They knew they would die. They went anyway, because the mission required it. The galaxy dreads humans not because they are strong, but because they are willing to die in ways that ensure you die with them. They view mutual destruction as an acceptable outcome. They have made peace with their own extinction as long as they take their enemies with them. Recommendation: humanity must never be made an enemy of the Galactic Coalition. They are too dangerous, not because of what they can build, but because of what they will sacrifice. If humans ever turn their endless capacity for warfare against the Coalition, the result will be catastrophic for all involved. They did not come to the stars to explore. They came to survive, and they are very, very good at surviving, no matter what the cost. Krelvax submitted his report and requested immediate transfer back to Centauri space. He had seen enough. The Vrexians had been defeated in the Tertius system, their forward base destroyed. It was a significant victory for the Coalition, the first major success in the war. 3 days later, Krelvax stood in the observation deck of a transport ship, watching as the human survivors prepared to deploy to their next assignment. There were fewer than 100 Marines left from the original 300. They were wounded, exhausted, and traumatized, but they were loading onto transport ships, checking their weapons, preparing for the next battle. Captain Morrison found him there. The human captain had a drink in his hand, some amber liquid in a clear container. He offered it to Krelvax. "It's whiskey. Human drink. Helps with the nightmares." Krelvax accepted it, his manipulator appendages awkward around the container. "How do they do it? How do they keep going after losing so many?" Morrison looked out at the Marines. "Because that's what we do. We've been doing it for thousands of years. We lose people, we grieve, and then we keep fighting because there's no other choice." He was quiet for a moment. "You understand now, don't you? Why the elder species didn't want us in the Coalition?" "Yes," Krelvax said. "They knew you would bring war to the stars." "We didn't bring war," Morrison corrected. "War was already here. The Vrexians made sure of that. We just brought the knowledge of how to win it, no matter the cost." He took the drink back and finished it. "The galaxy is going to change now. You've seen what we can do. Other species will either adapt to our way of fighting, or they'll stay in support roles while we do the dying." Krelvax watched as the last transport loaded the Marines and lifted off. "Will you win? Against the Vrexians?" Morrison smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "We'll win or we'll die trying. And if we die, we'll take them with us. That's the only way humans know how to fight." The transport ship carried Krelvax away from the Tertius system. He spent the journey reading more about human history, trying to understand what the galaxy had unleashed. Humans had been isolated on their single planet, fighting each other, refining their capacity for warfare. Now they were free among the stars, bringing their endless appetite for conflict with them. The galaxy would never be the same. Krelvax knew this with certainty. Humans had shown that they would pay any price, accept any casualty rate, endure any horror if it meant winning. And they had proven they were very good at winning, even when it looked like suicide to every other species. As his ship jumped to hyperspace, Krelvax sent one final addendum to his report. Humanity's greatest weapon is not their technology or their tactics. It is their acceptance of their own mortality in service of victory. They are the only species in the galaxy that views extinction as an acceptable tactical option. May we never give them reason to use that weapon against us.